Sure.
So what is your thoughts of, did we kind of devolve and we were once a little bit more advanced? I mean, if you look into the yugas and the concepts of in ancient Hindu scripts that talk about the cycles, the 24,000 year cycles, and that we were at a higher societal intellectual thing, and we start to devolve.
Sure.
Which, looking around us, we have devolved. But I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it.
There's a battle unfolding in our world right now that's playing out on many different levels. There is a battle for our beliefs, what we believe about everything, what we believe about climate change, about pandemic, about 5G, about chemtrails, all those things.
Yeah.
There's a battle for our thoughts, and that battle is playing out every minute of every hour of every day through the news feeds of legacy media that are pushing us to embrace a way of thinking that supports very, very specific agendas. There is a battle playing out in the classroom in terms of the textbooks and the teachings, who we are, where we come from, and this battle is all over what is called it's our story, the story of our past. But all of this, in my experience, in my opinion, is providing cover for an even deeper battle. And there is literally a battle for our very humanness. Our humanness is on the line as advanced technologies are being proposed to replace our biology. So everything from artificial intelligence to chemicals in the blood, chips in the brain, sensors under the skin, all of this. So there is a battle for the way that we have been taught to think about ourselves. And that battle is fighting tooth and nail to hang on to what's called the standard model. So the standard model says that we're born into a dead universe, in a dead inert universe, Big Bang, just happened to occur. Lucky physics is what it's called. And that we are the product of random genetic mutations. Lucky biology is what it's called. And that civilization began in a primitive state and evolved slowly, gradually over long periods of time. This is all part of the standard model that's being fought for. The problem, Alex, is that the data, as a scientist, I can look you and our viewers right in the eye, and I can tell you this straight up without any hesitation. The data doesn't support the standard model. The data now tells us that the universe appears to be alive. It functions as a living being. It makes intelligent decisions. When there's a star that's going to explode and can damage other star systems or other solar systems, they will change their course to avoid the energy that's coming from these exploding stars. And the Hubble Space Telescope and the James Webb Telescope were the first to actually capture these things happening. And if it was just once, it could be a fluke, but it was happening again and again and again. The universe appears to be a living entity, alive, conscious. Humans, there is no physical evidence to support the theory of evolution as we are teaching in our schools, that we evolved from primitive, less evolved beings than we are. It's speculation, it's theory. And now the DNA studies are telling us that we appeared mysteriously about 200,000 years ago. We can extract the DNA from ancient forms of life now and compare their genome to ours, and it tells us we didn't descend from Neanderthal. We share DNA because we interbred with them. So we had Neanderthal boyfriends and girlfriends. But, so the point of all of this is the evidence doesn't support the standard model. The standard model keeps us feeling powerless and separate from our world and makes us vulnerable to other people's ideas of how we live our lives and what kind of a society is possible. When it comes to civilization itself, the same thing is happening. When I was in school, again, 50s, 60s, early 1970s, I was taught that civilization began in what's called the cradle of civilization, the Indus Valley, about 5,000 years ago, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley.
Right.
That idea has gone right out the window, but it's still being taught in the mainstream curriculum. We now know there was not a single cradle of civilization, but there were apparently 6 simultaneous cradles of civilization, Tigris Euphrates was one of them. Egypt was one. There was one in Mesopotamia. There was one in China. One in northern Peru. It was called the Corral civilization. Mesoamerica was another one of those civilizations. And what's interesting is they all had similar technologies, and they all had the pyramidal technologies. They all had cosmologies that tell us things about our solar system and our Milky Way that we only rediscovered in the 20th century. And some of this stuff's thousands of years old. They had architecture, they had agriculture, they had mathematics. And so the question is, where did all of that come from? How did all of that happen? And as a scientist, what I have to say, honestly, when you look at the data and you look at the genetic manipulation that had to occur for us to be who we are, human chromosome number 2 is very well documented as being a chromosome that's a result of a fusion and genetic manipulation that cannot happen under natural circumstances. And it's responsible for our ability to have empathy and sympathy and self-regulation of our biology. It's responsible for a brain 50% larger than our nearest primates. It's all because of that chromosome. And chromosome 7 is the reason that we have complex speech and why you will never hear a chimpanzee sing Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, because their chromosome 7 does not have the mutations that ours does. Ours all underwent the mutations at the same time, rapidly, in the same period of time, not slowly, gradually over long periods of time. And scientists know that these things cannot happen under natural conditions. So as a scientist, I have to say that it appears that there's some kind of intervention that has happened in our past 200,000 years ago, and scientists agree on the date. So, we appeared 200,000 years ago. No controversy around that. The question is, where do we come from? That's where the controversy is happening. So the civilizations that we have been taught in the past, we were taught that civilization began 5,000 years ago. Now what we know is that 5,000 years is the most recent 5,000-year cycle. And we've been taught the history only of the most recent 5,000-year cycle. And there was another one before that, and that's where you see things like the Gulf of Kambat in India, under 120 feet of water, 9,500 years old, a city 3 miles long, 5 miles wide, that matches the description in the Bhagavad Gita that everybody thought was a fairy tale. And that's where you see other places like Corral in southern Peru. Corral collapsed when we are taught that civilization began. Corral collapsed 5,000 years ago, but it goes back another 2,000 years before that. So there's another 5,000-year window. And now Göbekli Tepe and what we're finding now in Antarctica, now that the ice is melting, satellites are showing complex archaeological structures underneath the ice. That ice has been there for 20,000 years. The question is, who was building this stuff 20,000 years ago? So now you've got a third 5,000-year cycle. And these cycles are very familiar. They're 5,125-year long cycles that are called Great World Ages that make up the Mesoamerican calendar. Many people call it the Mayan calendar, that are driven largely by climate change and by Earth's location in space relative to the sun. Earth does a dance. So it's a tilt and an angle and a wobble the Earth is doing on a regular basis. Milankovitch cycles is what these are called in geologic terms. And that drives a lot of the change. So now we're looking back at pre-Ice Age civilizations, over 20,000 years BP, before present. And the standard model is pushing back on this. So as a scientist, I can tell you what happens when the discovery is made, Alex. It doesn't fit the traditional model. So whether it's evolution for humans or whether it's civilization, for the planet, if the discovery doesn't fit, it's called an anomaly. And then they take the anomalies and they put them into a pile over here, and they say, we'll come back and we'll look at that later. Well, now what's happened is the pile of anomalies is actually so great, it's rewriting the traditional story. So I have friends in academia. Well, they're friends until we have this conversation. Then we don't talk for a while. And and I ask them. I said, "Well, how come you can't? Why can't you teach this to your students? Why not share everything with our young people? Give them the old ideas, give them the new discoveries, and let them, let them figure it out." And what this particular is a male. He's a professor at a well-known university. He said, we're going to leave that battle for the next generation of professors. He said there's a new generation of college professors. We're going to let them fight that standard model because we don't want to change the books. We don't want to change what we've taught for 40 or 45 years. So here's the net result, is that we have a generation of young people now that are dedicated and really want to solve the problems that we have left them, but we're asking them to solve the problems through the same thinking that we use to create the problems. We're not sharing the new information. So of course that's changing. It's changing very slowly. And so it's a long answer to a short question, but I think what we have to say is there has been intervention, and all of the evidence, if you look at the DNA evidence, it supports that through genetic manipulation. Cultural evidence, every indigenous tradition I've ever studied, Alex, not one of them says anything about evolution, slow, gradual change. They all say we are the product of a greater cosmic community. Mm-hmm. We have relations that extend beyond this world. They all say that, from the Tibetans to the shamans and the Yucatan, and certainly in the Andes, the native indigenous traditions throughout the Americas. They all say this. So this is the cultural evidence. The archaeological evidence, I am a consultant as a geologist and a linguist. I'm a consultant on a couple of archaeological projects that are now revealing archaeological evidence depicting direct relationships between people of the earth and people from beyond the earth. And what's interesting is on these archaeological artifacts, there are maps of our solar system that are showing rings around Neptune, for example, that we didn't even know had rings until relatively late in the 20th century. And they're showing, of course, the rings around Saturn and also the rings around Jupiter. They're showing the relative sizes. They're showing the moons of the different planets in our solar system. But the interesting thing is they're showing it as if you were coming inbound rather than from Earth leaving our solar system. And you have to say, where does that stuff come from? And if you see one or two, you could say, well, maybe it's a lucky fluke. We're literally talking about hundreds of artifacts depicting the same things, but they're recorded in different media, most of it's on stone that we're seeing. So now we've got archaeological evidence, we've got genetic evidence, we've got cultural evidence, and archaeological evidence, because what we're seeing is these archaeological sites are now being dated 25, 30,000 years before BP, before present, Ice Age or even pre-Ice Age, and none of it fits the standard model. None of it supports the story that we've been taught. The false narrative of obsolete science being held in the classroom has hurt knowledge in the past. It's a perfect example because Göbekli Tepe, it's a series of mounds. They were discovered in southern Turkey. They were discovered, there was an American archaeologist who made the discovery back in the 90s. And he dated these things, and they came back over 10,000 BP, before present. And he had learned what all of us had learned, that civilization began 5,000 years ago. So Göbekli Tepe is a series of round temple sites that have been buried intentionally by whoever was living there. They were buried 8,000 years ago. We don't know why they were buried. If they were buried to protect them or to hide them, we don't know the answer to that. But now, and only a couple of them have been excavated. So earth-penetrating radar is showing there are about 20 of the temple sites. Only a couple have been excavated, and I think one primarily is available to the public right now. It's an ongoing archaeological site. But now they're showing the dating is showing that it was buried 8,000 years ago, which already blows the timeline. But that now they're going back over 13,000 years BP, before present. Well, the reason this is a problem, two reasons. One, it's older than 5,000 years, the cradle of civilization. But number two, as a geologist, it's fascinating to me because the last ice age ended right around 12,000 years ago. And then there was a period of unsettled weather for about 4,000 years when the ice melted and the great floods happened on the earth. We can see that. So if the ice age ended around 12,000 and we're now dating 13 to 15,000, it means these were either built during the ice age, which is unlikely, or they were built pre-ice age and then the ice, was, and all of this, these other things happened that were allowed them to be covered. So the truth is we don't know who built these, and there appear to be no written records. And you find this time and time again. And I lead groups into southern Peru. I have for 40 years now. What we find in the pre-Incan sites, like Tiwanaku and Bolivia, and even in some of the archaeological sites in the Sacred Valley in Cusco, no written records. So you see this time and time again. Corral, Peru, no written records. Or did they have written records that we simply haven't recognized? Were they using a form of communication that we're only, beginning to understand? And that's the evidence supports that, and that's the beginning of another conversation. So Göbekli Tepe is a tangible mystery because you cannot deny what the evidence is showing. Antarctica is blowing those dates right out the window. The problem is Antarctica is off limits to civilians. So there's a little place on the Ross Shelf where civilians are allowed, a little day trip. But the interior of Antarctica is off limits.
By who? Who's stopping that?
Well, this is what's interesting. Back in the 1950s, this is at the during the Cold War years. Antarctica was kind of divided up. It was said it was an international continent. Nobody owns it, but at the same time, the superpowers at the time put military bases. China's got their base, America has their base, Russia has their base. The interior of the continent, once you get beyond the ice, appears to be desert. There is no ice. And it's got to be one of the driest, it's zero humidity, one of the driest places on the face of the earth. Yeah, as a geologist, I'm fascinated by it. So I think probably some of the tallest mountain ranges are underneath that ice right now. The ice is about 2 miles thick, and it's been there around 20,000 years. Now that global warming is melting the ice, what the satellite imagery is showing are complex structures. They're not like little pole huts, and hunting villages. I mean, these are big, complex structures, and they are believed to be relatively intact. And either somebody built them in the ice or they were there before the ice occurred 20,000 years ago. They had film crews that have gone down that have never been seen again. One of them very famously was from, I think, UCLA, and they were, relatively young people. We don't know where that film crew is. The parents are, working with agencies to try to find it out. So I think whatever we discover, and it will be revealed, when it's revealed in Antarctica, will blow the Göbekli Tepe dates right out the window. And all of it says to us is that there's a new human story emerging. We are not what we've been told. We're so much more than we've been led to believe in the past. The better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to deal with the crises and the challenges that life brings to our doorstep. And the better we know ourselves, the less we fear change. And this is a big one, Alex, because the world is changing and people are being conditioned to be afraid of the change, and that fear makes them vulnerable to other people's ideas of what the world should look like. And some of we need change. I mean, I think the global financial system, for example, it's buckling and collapsing under its own weight because it's unsustainable. Our energy equation on the planet is unsustainable in its current form. The way that we're growing food is unsustainable in the presence of changing climate, which changes the local weather. The good news is that we already have all the answers to all the big problems facing us right now. We've had them for over almost 70 years. We've had the answers to the technological answers to energy, to food, to climate, all finances. We know how to build economies based on sharing and cooperation rather than scarcity and competition, which is what's playing out in the world right now. We already know all this. What's lacking is the leadership that makes these things a priority and makes human life a priority in our lives. And when I say leadership, I don't mean America or Europe or China or Russia or anything. It's just the leaders. We're all leaders. We're all leaders. Mm-hmm. It's about the way that we think about ourselves and our brothers and sisters on this planet, and then the way that we transform our thinking into the choices that we make politically, financially, economically. And it's a very empowering way to begin to think about our world, but it all begins with our story. As a scientist, here's how I look at this, Alex. I say that we are on a big learning curve, and that we've made choices in the past as individuals and societies based on what we knew at the time. We couldn't possibly have known in the 1950s what we know right now about DNA and biology and about energy production. So those old ideas, they served us and they got us to where we are, and now we can let them go gracefully rather than struggle to try to hang on to things that don't work. And let's embrace the new technologies that are out there and the thinking that makes them possible in our lives. And I think for the first time in a long time, we're going to find out what it really means to be human in this beautiful world that supports our humanness.